Welcome to the Unit 2 PowerPoint. As you know, we are combining periods 3 and 4. Unit 3 is known as Land-Based Empires, and Unit 4 is Transoceanic Interconnections. So we are going to put them together. We're really going to kind of talk about Unit 4 first. That's the transoceanic connections. Then we're going to go back to the land-based empires, just because that works chronologically. So why did we go to the New World? Well, let me tell you. It goes into the Italian Renaissance. So why the Renaissance? What's going on? It's the end of the Middle Ages. The Renaissance actually means it's like a rebirth of learning, literature, art, culture. Due to the patronage of wealthy elites, so you got lots of rich people, mostly merchants, they decide to pay these Renaissance era writers and thinkers to not get jobs, but just to write and think. Wouldn't that just be wonderful? So these writers and thinkers traveled around Italy. They're studying ancient ruins, rediscovering Greek and Roman texts. What causes this? What makes them want to do all these things? Well, we have a rejection of medieval values. Now, a recovery after the plague, feudalism ends. We've got these new monarchies that are rising. Crusades increase contact with the East. After Constantinople falls, the scholars flee west. So, before the Middle Ages, we've talked about this the last unit, but the first real cause is this increased interactionism with the Silk Roads. The Middle Ages were rife with feudalism and religion, but the Silk Roads brought all these new cultures in which forced these cultures to mingle, these people to start talking, allowing the minds to open up. So this leads to the rejection of medieval values. The Crusades also had the people of different faiths interacting. So there were new understandings about foods and culture practices and celebrations. So everyone's starting to just kind of come together. There was also recovery after the plague. The plague allowed people to start questioning the existence of God because they thought, how could a God who loves us so much kill so many people? So it gets people's brains start going. Why does this happen in Italy, where you have all these thriving cities up here on the coast? If you have access to all these trade routes, because you're right here on the ocean, you're close to the Silk Route, you're close to the ocean, so you're close to Africa. You got this Greek Roman heritage. You have wealthy merchants. It's happening right here. It's kind of self-explanatory. Here, you have Florence is a city in Italy. You need to kind of know about the Medici family. So really write this down. They were known as the House of Medici. It's a banking family. They were also a political dynasty. They sponsor art and they dominate politics. You don't need to know which popes they produce, but this family ends up having 4 different popes in the family. Leo X, Clement VII, Pius IV, and Leo XI. They also have 2 queens of France, Catherine de' Medici and Marie de' Medici. Why they're important is because they bankroll the invention of the piano and opera. They also are in charge of the construction of St. Peter Basilica. They pay and patronize artists known as Leonardo, you may have heard of him, Michelangelo, Machiavelli, and Galileo. Kind of important. So you want to know these people. Um, Moving on. The Renaissance is also popular for the idea of humanism. This is an intellectual movement that emphasizes the study of classical texts and the human potential. You're going to hear about this in history and literature and philosophy throughout high school and in college. It's a big deal. Secularism is basically the opposite of religion. It's worldly, it's less religious, which is, of course, you compare it to the Middle Ages, which was all about its religion. This was about an enjoyment of life, which is why we have building of lavish estates during this time, and banquets and arts. The Renaissance, I've just talked about patronage. A patron is usually a merchant. This is a person who lends financial support of the arts. We talked about, artists, and we got the Mona Lisa during this time. Mona Lisa, very famous, not only just for her hidden smile, but also, does she have eyebrows? I don't know. The arts during this time, a typical medieval painting, if you can see, it's very 2D. It's the expressionist type of thing. It's interesting, but then look here, you have this thing known as perspective. There seems to be like a 3D quality to it. So art is very much going to change. Let's talk about some literature. The vernacular art and literature at the time is going to be written in the local languages. We have Petrarch as a humanist poet. Boccaccio, I'm probably saying that wrong. He writes a Decameron. If you ever want to know it, it influences the Canterbury Tales. And then there's The Prince, written by Niccolo Machiavelli. This is one of the first works of modern philosophy. Do you really need to know these exact words? No, but is it going to show up at some point, maybe in a reading and maybe in a stimulus? It might. So you need to know these are pieces that are written during the Renaissance. But a way to know that it's Renaissancey, it's because it's a very Italian type name. Kind of looks like pasta names. You know, you might see this dish at a Olive Garden, a Machiavelli. Would you like a Machiavelli with a side of lasagna? You know, that's how I kind of remember it. Here's a piece in the prints. By the way, both these pieces you can find on the internet for free because they've been in print for so long. It is necessary indeed to put a good color on this nature and to be skilled in simulating and dissembling. But men are so simple and governed so absolutely by their present needs that he who wishes to deceive will never fail in finding willing dupes. All right, did you think that Italy was having all the fun? Oh, goodness, no. It travels north. So in the late 1400s, merchants, scholars, students are carrying the Renaissance north out of Italy. But in northern Europe, it's more religious than secular. You have what is known as Christian humanism. So you might want to kind of know about this guy named Erasmus. He writes The Praise of Folly. It's sarcastic, but he does have Christian themes. His idea is to reform society and that he believes that people should study the Bible. Tell me, by all the gods, is anyone happier than that class of man who we commonly call fools, idiots, morons, and simpletons? Names my opinion of exquisite beauty, basically saying, aren't stupid people just so happy? I mean, is he wrong? Then you have Sir Thomas More. He writes Utopia, which is an imaginary land inhabited by peace-loving people, basically saying that war and violence, corruption are all weeded out. Gold and silver, of which money is made, are so treated that no one veils them more highly than their true nature deserves. Who does not see that they are far inferior to iron in usefulness, since without iron mortals cannot live any more than without fire and water? William Shakespeare writes, tragedy, Romeo and Juliet. He writes the Julius Caesar, it's the history, and he is around during the time of the Elizabethan age. It was a golden age in England. Most of the words you say today are because of William Shakespeare. Whether or not he actually wrote his works or he took them from someone else, there's even some people who say he didn't exist. Whatever the case, for world history's sake, he exists. For world history's sake, he wrote it all. Whatever English teacher you end up having who wants to debate, cool, cool, cool. But for world history AP, he totally existed. Let's just agree on that. Okay. For the spiced tea, for the tea, you need to know the printing press. It's invented in 1440. It prints out the Gutenberg Bible. Before the printing press, if you wrote a book, there was one copy of it. You're not going to write the same book twice. But the printing press wrote it over and over and over again. The idea spread rapidly, increased literacy rates. People started to read. This is why the printing press was so important, because now you could print the Bible over and over. People actually start to read the Bible. It's fantastic. That's why you need to know about this. Here's a summary of this. There's new technology, central monarchs. If you want to know some central monarchs, you got Charles the seventh of France. He ends civil disputes. You have Louis the 11th of France. He unites France as it recovers from the 100 Years' War. And Henry the 7th of England. He ends the War of Roses. All these three kings, they create an efficient tax system that they also maintain a standing army and they foster trade. So that's some central monarchs you might want to know. The wealth from trade during this time finances voyages, discovery. They set Europe on a path to dominate world affairs. So this is why the Renaissance is so important. And we're going to go into it throughout this entire PowerPoint. This PowerPoint is 143 slides. All right. Trust me, do not sit down and decide you're going to watch this entire PowerPoint in one night. You can't do it. Just watch bits and pieces. But printing is going to lead to a massive religious reform everywhere. We're going to talk about it. It's going to be great. But until then, the age of exploration. Look at this beautiful piece of art here. Ignore that. Sorry about that. I'm going to turn that off. Here we go. Okay. Earlier explorations. So Islam and the spice trade. We've talked a little bit about Malacca. It's present-day Malaysia. Malaysia is in Southeast Asia, right here. This is South Asia. South Asia is India. Southeast Asia. You need to know that's one of your AP regions. Know that. This is an important commercial city. It connects to China and the Islamic world. So you got China's trading down here, and the Islamic world is trading to it. Very, very important. This guy, Admiral Zhang He, we're going to talk about him around like slide 130, and we're only on slide 21. He's very important. He's during the Ming Dynasty. His voyages are cut off abruptly as China already had so many resources. China focuses mainly on trading with East Asia. Look at how big his ship was compared to a typical European ship. There are historians that believe that had he not died, or had he had more friends in his government, because he did not have a lot of friends in his government, but had they continued his voyages after his death, the world would look very different than it does today, because he was hitting Africa, he was hitting India, that they think that he would have discovered the new world and Europe would not have. So we would have a very different world today. But after he died, they stopped. They cut off all traveling. They were like, we're done. He was actually born a Muslim and he was a eunuch. So kind of a big deal. All right, so we have a new player because remember there was the ones that were dominating all the trade were the Muslims. The monarchs in Europe had authority and resources to expand and explore. Muslim merchants were selling goods at outrageous prices, though. They wanted spices and precious metals. So all these Europeans had a motive. They wanted gold. They wanted to spread the word of God, and they wanted glory. They wanted to, tell everyone, look what we did, look what we found. So the three G's, gold, glory, and God. So here's one of the navigators you want to know, Prince Henry. He's a patron of Portuguese trade. In 1419, he founds a navigational school and funds exploration. He sends out crews to explore the western coast of Africa. He establishes these trading posts. He's looking for gold. Then we've got Bartholomew Diaz. He's the first to sail around the tip of Africa, kind of a big deal. Then we got Vasco da Gama. He arrives in Calicut, India in 1498. He finds a direct route to India. He wants to destroy the Arab shipping and establish a monopoly on trade. That's his reasoning for doing this. But you notice they have to go all the way around the tip of Africa. It's a long trip. It takes him 2 years to do that. So Portugal is establishing a trade post empire. They have the use of naval technology and gunpowder. It's giving them an advantage. They're making substantial money. They're seizing control of the spice trade, but they're lacking the power and the population and a desire to even want to colonize Asia. So they're not really doing much. Let's get to where we want to go, though. It's Christopher Columbus. He gets to Asia by sailing west, not around Africa. He's like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to hit those new lands. He gets to Cuba, not to Asia. He's off by 8,465 miles, just 8,465 miles. He's financed by Queen Isabella. He set sails in August of 1492, lands in October. So it only takes him 12 months, or 2 months, sorry, two. Wow. He believes, of course, he reached Asia. He didn't quite do it. Some others we want to know about, of course, though. We've got Ferdinand Magellan. He's first known person to circumnavigate the entire world. We name a strait after him in South America. It's right there. It's in Chile. Strait of Magellan. Good to know. Other explorers from France, we have Jacques Cartier. I'm probably totally saying that wrong. French, 1534. He's looking for a route to the Pacific Ocean through North America. It's called the Northwest Passage. It doesn't exist. He will not be the last one to look for it. He names the region that he finds called Canada. Then we have Sir Francis Drake. He's the second one to make an expedition to sail around the world. Good for him. Everyone's got to have a hobby. Then we have the Treaty of Tordesillas, or as I like to mispronounce it, the Treaty of Tortillas. In 1494, there were these newly discovered lands that would be divided as follows. So the Spanish versus the Portuguese. The Spanish are led by Ferdinand and Isabella. they get the Spanish-born Pope Alexander VI to set up this line right here. He sets this line up, and it's called the line of demarcation. It's like if you have to share a room with a little brother or sister and you put a line down the center of the room and you say, you don't cross this line, you'll call that line the line of demarcation. However, King John II of Portugal is unhappy. So they meet up at this place called Tordesillas in northwest Spain, and they reaffirm the papal division, but they move the line to right here. Then Portugal gets Brazil after Pedro Alvarez Cabral in 1500 basically claims it all the way over here. That's why in Brazil they speak Portuguese, and everywhere else in South America they speak Spanish. So everywhere west of the line, Spanish. Everywhere east of it, Portuguese. There you go. Then you have these conquistadors. Conquistadors are like the Spanish men who come over to America. They conquer the natives because they, A, had guns, B, they had help from other native tribes. They go over to tribe number one and say, hey, tribe number two wants to kill you. So tribe number one goes, helps the Spanish people go kill tribe number two. Tribe number two had no intention of killing tribe number one, but tribe number one was lied to. And then, of course, they have the immunity to diseases like smallpox. The Spanish people just naturally carried it because it's like when you get a vaccine, you just naturally carry it. Well, they bring it over and they kill lots of native people with it. The climate exchange, super duper important. You really need to know this. Do you need to know everything comes over? Not everything, but I mean, I would know smallpox. I would know sugar cane. I would know livestock. I would know the things that came back from the New World to the Old World, like tobacco, potatoes. Tomatoes are good. Sweet potatoes, vanilla. Those are good things to know. So the Columbian exchange is a transfer of people, animals, plants, and diseases between the New and Old worlds. This follows the European invasions of late 15th and early 16th centuries. Now, did any diseases come from the New World to the Old World? Yes, there's been a little bit of debate, but there was like an STD that came over. Did it devastate the Old World? No way. Nuh-uh, not happening. Not like smallpox did. So we talked about the Silk Road and how, the bubonic plague spread. We've got some historical context. This intensified the exchange where it was already happening, but the Columbian exchange initiated exchange where it had not previously happened. So you have catastrophe and new opportunity. Talk about the demographic changes. 50 to 80% of Native people died. It was estimated anywhere to 33 to 50 million people existed, and it went down to 4.5 million people. The Inca alone went from 9 million people down to 600,000, all because of smallpox, measles, typhus, and influenza. It was unequal to what they gave back to the old world people. Now, what did the old world get? Whew, they got new food. Fantastic. They got high calorie potatoes replaces bread. They got better nutrition. So if you have better nutrition, you have better food. You're living longer. You get more people. It was wonderful. They're having a great old time in the old world. They also got tobacco. They loved tobacco in the old world. The old world gave them sugar cane, though, in the new world. And that meant that you needed people to farm the sugar cane, which led to plantations, which led to slavery. We'll get to that. The horses were brought over by 1700. 50 million wild horses were in South America, North Mexico, and Southwest U.S. states. The Great Plains Native Americans captured and used horses to increase their power. So let's talk about the European empires in the Americas. We have to talk about this. I'll kind of tell you what you need to know. So, colonial administration. First, Spain. The viceroyalty was divisions of Spanish Empire in the New World. So the king would send representatives to the New World, and they would set up camp in urban cities. You're not going to set up camp in a rural area. You're going to set it up like in Mexico City or in Lima with a large bureaucracy. This person would be like your governor in your new place because a king can't be in two places at once, right? That makes sense. Viceroyalty is a local political, social, and administrative institution created by the Spanish monarchy in the 15th century. Now, you have Jesuits, they arrived to promote Catholic Reformation. They set up missions. They're living in the countryside. They become very sympathetic to American Indians and eventually protest the Spanish exploitation. We'll talk about it in just a minute, but one person you really need to know is Bartolome de las Casas. He's a really big deal, and we'll talk about him in just a minute. Here's some pictures of ones that if you want to take a second to pause and kind of look at, just to get an idea of these buildings that are still in existence today. These were missions that were set up, 400, 500 years ago, and they're still there. All right. Encomienda system. So you've got a major source of silver for the Spanish in Peru and Mexico. The encomienda system, the intention behind it was that the encomenderos were Spanish settlers. Their job was to take the Native Americans, Christianize them, give them food, give them shelter, give them clothes, and in turn, the natives would then work for them in the mines. What actually ended up happening was they would force them by making them slaves, beating them, and not Christianizing them, and not giving them food, and not clothing them, and basically treating them like utter crap. It was just a horrible system. So that leads to Bartolome de las Casas and other priests as well. So this is an important one you need to know. He will pop up in some type of reading, either a stimulus, an SAQ, an LAQ, or DBQ. He wrote about the Spanish brutality in the New World back to people in the Old World, basically trying to get them to change the ways of the people in the New World. Indeed, they invented so many new methods of murder that it would be quite impossible to set them all down on paper. During the 3 or 4 months I was there, more than 7,000 children died of hunger after their parents had been shipped off to the mines. Such inhumanities and barbarisms were committed in my sight as no age can parallel. My eyes have seen these acts so foreign to human nature that I now tremble as I write. The colonial class system, you need to know this. All right, so peninsulares were people that were born in Spain and they're living in the New World. But then underneath them, so they're the highest of the high. Then you have Creoles, who are descendants of peninsulares. They are people that are born in America, but their parents were born in Spain. Then you have mestizos. So you have one parent who's a native and one parent who's a Spanish person. Then you have a mulatto. A parent is an African slave and a parent who's a Spanish person. And then on the very bottom, you have a parent, you are an American Indian or you are an African slave. They were the bottom. They created these cast of paintings. Sorry, we can go back, and if you need to pause it, I'd pause it now to kind of write that down. They created these casts of paintings to demonstrate the class system in Latin America to let you know kind of where you existed. They date to 18th century colonial Mexico. So this was a Spanish and a Native American mestizo. Spanish person marrying an African person. An African person marrying a Native American. So mercantilism, you need to know about this, is an economic system where the European mother country would extract the raw materials from the colonies. They would make something, then they'd sell them back to the colonies. The sole purpose of the colony was to make the mother country rich. Because any country wants to have more exports than imports. So this was a whole commercial revolution time. I mean, it wasn't really good for the colonies, but it was great for the mother country. Silver during this time, the highest producers were the Americas and Japan. The highest consumers were Europe and China. The Philippines was this major link. And by 1570, China required all taxes to be paid in silver. So from 1500 to 1800, Mexico and Peru produced 80% of the silver in the world, and 30% of it ended up in China. And silver was actually used to buy slaves and spices, so it was a big deal. The world basically ran on silver. Shoguns in Japan became rich when they used it to strengthen their state against warlords, but the New World death toll was associated with mining, and it went up in the millions. Over time, of course, too much silver flowed into Spain, causing inflation. China, Spain, Ottoman empires all were negatively impacted rather, economically by inflation. The Atlantic slave trade. This is an important graphic. I like it. So if you are in a boat, a big ship, you're here, you're going to pack up your ship with textiles, rum, and guns. You're going to take them over here. You're going to trade with an African tribe that has people. They've captured the people in here, and they're going to bring them over to here. You're going to trade here for sugar, and over here for tobacco, or for cotton, up here for tobacco, and then you're going to back here and you're going to start the whole process all over again. So it did exist in Africa before the coming of Europeans. We talked about this in the last unit. Um, the difference was not just in Muslim slavery and in Muslim different cultures, depending on where you were a slave, there were times that if you were captured, um, if you converted to Islam, then you were no longer a slave, or there was no such thing as hierarchical slavery. Or sometimes, if you were captured by another tribe in war, then if you married into the family, you were no longer a slave. So slavery was different in Africa versus what it becomes in America. In America, it's based solely on the color of your skin, and you're no longer a human being. You become a piece of property. So between 16th century and the 19th century, about 11 million Africans forcibly migrated outside of their continent to the Americas, all because of sugarcane and sugar plantations. The first boatload of African slaves were brought by the Spanish in 1518. This is known as the Middle Passage of the Triangular Trade. So it's not the Columbian Exchange, it is the Triangular Trade. Columbian Exchange is more products and things like fruits and vegetables and animals and diseases. The Triangular Trade is the people. This is how they were placed. There were a few other positions. This was one of the most popular. They were maybe about 3 feet between the ground and the ceiling, just so they could compact them in more. Many of them died en route. They were in those boats for weeks at a time. Um, they were stuck there. They would have to use the bathroom there. There was no getting up and moving around. It was very inhuman. They were not treated like people. So there were very competing claims in North America. So yellow is Spain, green is French, and red, pink is English. So this is solidly pink, but then you get over here and you're getting pink and green mixing, and this is solidly yellow in Florida. But then you're having pink and yellow mixing, and then pink and green mixing. Then we have green and yellow mixing here, but then solidly green, green and pink up here. It's just a whole hodgepodge. Everyone's mixing around. Everyone is competing for the same piece of land. Thing is, if France and England are both saying this is ours, nobody's living up here. It's not as though there's lots of people here. It's just they said it's ours. That's the problem. You might have some people on Newfoundland, but it's so cold up there, you may have two people. Two. It's too cold for everyone to live there. So it just depended on the solid parts are probably where people were living all the time. Out here you had a few French people, a few English people, and England said this is ours and France says this is ours, but it depends on who's there at the time. So England and the Netherlands, when it comes to a joint stock company, let's briefly discuss this. A joint stock company is the ancestor to a modern corporation. Think of it like Facebook. You've heard of Facebook, I'm sure. It's that thing your aunt wants you to get on, and because she posted pictures of her puppy and she wants you to see it, even though she could just text you the pictures, but she wants you to get on Facebook. Back in the day, Mark Zuckerberg owned Facebook all by himself, but then he took the company and he went public. Now, what that means is a lot of people own a piece of Facebook. When there's more investors in a company like Facebook, it allows Facebook to do more things like Facebook TV. I don't know if you've heard of Facebook TV, but the actress Jada Pinkett Smith, she's married to the actor Will Smith. She has her own TV show on there. So 10 years ago when Facebook was around, they didn't have Facebook TV. But they can now do things like that because they have more investors. If Facebook goes down tomorrow, all the investors are going to lose a little bit of money, but Mark Zuckerberg is not going to lose billions of dollars. It's going to be okay. He'll lose a little bit of money, but not billions of dollars. That's the same thing as a joint stock company. So, back when Jamestown was going to be started, when they wanted to go over to the New World, to set up a camp, to set up a world, like a little community, it was too expensive. So you would pool your resources with other merchants. You would invest in a crew of people who were going to go look for riches, ideally gold, and what they found, you and the other merchants would profit from, all splitting up the profits. So you'd send a group of people over there, and they're going to get like 20%. You and all the other merchants are going to split the 80% that they find. If you were the only one who invested and they find gold, cool, great, you're going to make money. But 9 times out of 10, you're not going to find anything. It's too much of a gamble, too much of a risk. You're not going to take that risk because you would lose everything that you ever had. So if you invest with other people and they don't come back with anything, you lose a couple 100,000, whatever, not a big deal. If you lost everything, you can never make another gamble again. But if you only lost a couple 100,000, not a big deal. You've got that's money, that's chump change. That's nothing for you. I know for us that's a lot, but for them it's nothing. So, why do you need to know about the Dutch? Because you need to know that besides the French and the Spanish and English, the Dutch make a small appearance. Everyone was vying for the new land. So Henry Hudson explores New York in 1609. Before it was known as New York, it was known as New Amsterdam. They were slow to attract colonists, but they were ethnically and religiously diverse. And they were captured by the British and they become New York in 1664. New York, so nice they named it twice. England. So colonists in England were middle class. They were farmers, they were artisans, and they also had what are known as indentured servants. You'll learn a lot more about them next year. Before slavery really took off, what you would do if you wanted to go to the New World was you would buy a ticket. And on that ticket, if you didn't have a lot of money, you would have to go over to the New World, work for a family, um, and you would work for 7 years. So you were basically like a slave, but after 7 years, you got your freedom. And that was great and all, except it became really expensive for the rich people to have to keep getting a new indentured servant every 7 years. So they were like, you know what, we're done with this. We're going to get slaves. So the local governments have a lot of independence. They were initially friendly with the indigenous people, but as time goes on and they keep taking land from the natives, they become less friendly with the native people because they're like, you know what, we just want your land. We don't want you here anymore. It becomes a hot mess. So, what is the continuity and change between the British and the Spanish? Well, the British don't marry with the natives because when the British men come over, they bring their wives with them. The Spanish did not. They would just commingle with the natives and make families. The Protestant English were less concerned about spreading their religion, while the Spanish did spread their Catholicism. And the British, which we're going to lead to when we get to our revolutions chapter, or unit rather, they have something known as salutary neglect, which is going to lead to the American Revolution. Basically, the British crown was ignoring what was happening over here when it came to small governments, but the Spanish crown had the viceroys, so they were very much in control of what was going on as far as the government was happening over here. Tobacco was a leading export for the British versus the Spanish with their silver and their sugar cane. So they were exporting silver and sugar cane, the British were exporting tobacco. Both, however, they had in common was the women did not escape class and social restrictions. There was conflict with the indigenous people. They both had slavery in the agricultural southern colonies, and they both were established for profit. The French. So Samuel de Champlain was the first French colony. He establishes it in 1608. They have Montreal in 1642. They follow the waterways, the St. Lawrence and the Great Lakes and the Mississippi. They have territory in the Caribbean. They export tobacco and sugar. They do have conflict with the British, which starts the 7 Years' War in 1756, goes to 1763. France loses Canada. Of course, they still have that French portion where they say poutine differently. England is in control of the East Coast. Continuity and change between the French and the Spanish. So the French are respectful of the indigenous people, while the Spanish see them as savage and they need to find Jesus. The indigenous populations actually mostly side with the French during the Seven Years' War. And the fur trade was the most lucrative thing for the French, while the silver and sugar cane were the most lucrative for the Spanish. Both, however, have home countries that are Catholic and authoritarian, and they both had colonies in the Caribbean which relied on slavery. All right, now we're going to go over to the Unit 3 portion, the AP Unit 3. This is the gunpowder empires. So we're switching gears. This map is important. You need to know this map. If I'm saying that, I'm saying that for a reason. Okay, you're going to see it a few more times. So let's go over to the Ottoman Empire. All right, talk about the fall of the Byzantine Empire. So the immediate cause of the fall of the Byzantine was pressure from the Ottoman Turks. The Ottomans had been fighting the Byzantines for about 100 years. So the Fourth Crusade, Constantinople was sacked in about 1204. It recovered in 1261, but it was progressively annexed by the Ottomans in the Byzantine-Ottoman Wars over the 14th and 15th centuries. So in 1453, it falls full of the Constantine ended. It like ends it by the Byzantine Empire. It just ends it completely. Goodbye, you're done. So we've got this guy named Mehmed II. You'll see it spelled Mehmet, or you'll see it spelled Mehmed. He's also known as quote unquote the Conqueror. Pretty much gives it away. He renames Constantinople to Istanbul, Istanbul. This is a really important city due to its location on the Bosporus Strait. That is spelled Bosporus. It's a strait, Strait. That is the only waterway linking the Aegean Sea with the Black Sea. When the Mamluk dynasty, we talked about the Mamluks, declined, Istanbul becomes a major center for Islam. This is why it's important. If you ever need to see a map, there you go. It's like the war when Constantinople goes down. All right, Suleiman the Magnificent. So he attempts to conquer Vienna but fails twice due to his ability to send troops so far into Christian Europe, it actually scares the Europeans. He captures the island of Rhodes, Rhodes, which is part of Greece, and he takes control of Tripoli in North Africa. So he actually takes over a lot of stuff. He orders many mosques to be constructed, just like our old friend Mansa Musa. He's known as the lawgiver, Lawgiver, because he reforms the empire's legal systems. If you ever need to know about Suleiman, that's what he's known for. So this term that we're going to get here, Devashirme, I'm not really good at pronouncing things, guys. This is started during Mehmed's empire. They're Christian boys between the ages of 8 and 20 years old. They're taken by force to serve in the Ottoman government. They're often taken from conquered Christian lands in Europe. They would convert to Islam, and they were taught various skills in politics, arts, and the military. They were the most famous group were called Janissaries. You're going to see that in the next slide. Like you see it there on the bottom, but you'll see it spelled again in the next one. They would form elite forces in the Ottoman Empire. They would have upward mobility, just the Janissaries, but they were still slaves of the state. That's the word right there, Janissaries. So it wasn't great. All right. Here's the deal. In theory, the Sultan, which is the absolute monarch, was supposed to conduct affairs of the state exclusively through the Grand Vizier, who was the true head of state. But in reality, the Sultan would work around him. In the 19th century, though, that's the 1800s, the Grand Viziers would actually become more like prime ministers, because you have to keep in mind the Ottoman Empire went up until 1918. So the Ottoman Empire goes up until the 20th century. It's kind of a big deal. Now, women play a social and political role at the court, and many wives and concubines of the Sultan tried to promote their own children as likely heirs to the throne, giving rise to what is known as harem politics, which is a residence where a man's wives and concubines live. Like that's what the harem politics is. All right. This is interesting. So sultans claimed the title of caliph. They were Sunni Muslims. All non-Muslims had to pay that tax. You need to know the name of the tax. It's called a jizya. Jizya. Please know this. So when you're writing an SAQ and you need direct evidence, you need to use the word jizya from now on, okay? I was a little easy on that last SAQ, but now we got to use the word. Here's the deal. The Ottoman Empire, they had Sharia law for Muslims, but they also had something known as a millet system. So if you were a religious minority and you lived there, what you would do is you would organize into a unit of people and you would send a representative, like a rabbi, a priest, or a patriarch, to represent your religious minority community. And they would stand for you. They are responsible for your community. You are not under Sharia law. You're under your own set of laws, but if something goes wrong, that person who speaks for you would be held responsible for you as well. It's kind of a big deal. It's a nice little picture if you ever want to look at it. Kind of nice. All right, this is nice too. We're going to go over some pictures. They were big patrons of the arts, and you're going to see that in a second. They also have a big silk industry. Here's the Suleymaniye Mosque. I'm probably butchering that, and I apologize. The blue mosque and the Iznik tiling inside, that's all tiling. Very beautiful work. And this is when it starts to decline. It does last until 1918, but it starts to decline during the 16th to the 17th century. They have weak sultans because they also have strong European neighbors. They grow more insular and they become less tolerant to non-Muslims. They continue slavery into the 20th century. They start to fall apart after World War I. They've got an influx of silver in the 16th century from the New World, which causes a lot of inflation, and of course, they're unable to push the Portuguese from the Indian Ocean in the 1500s, so they lose a lot of revenue. All right, this next slide, you got to know the Sunni Shia split. You really, really, really have to know this. Please listen to, or at least read the transcript of a podcast. Google it. It's called Throughline, Throughline. It's on NPR. I know you're like, ugh, NPR. But it's hosted by these two young people. There's an episode called War of the Worlds. It's brief, it's quick. Even if you just listen to the first 15 minutes, it will explain to you the beginning of the Islamic religion and why these two groups split. And also Sufism kind of starts about 100 years after. One of my PowerPoints has a video. It's about 3 minutes, kind of goes over the overview of it, and it's this idea of rejection of materialism, but it's a mystical Islamic version. So please know those two. It's a big deal. You need to know it. Oh my gosh, we're back to the map. Well, if we just hit the Ottomans, it means we're going to hit the Safavids next. All right, so at only 14 or 15 years old, there's this Safavid military hero named Ismail. He conquers most of Persia and was proclaimed Shah, which also means king or emperor, in 1501. He used Shia Islam as a unifying force. He denies the legitimacy of rule to any Sunni Muslim. That will cause fighting with the Ottomans. Do you see? They're right next door. This lives on to today. Persia is present-day Iran. This is Iraq. These two countries don't get along. That's a problem. So we have the Battle of Chaldiran. I'm probably butchering that as well. So this is fighting between the Safavids and the Ottomans. It kept them from becoming much of a threat to Europe. So they have a rivalry with the Ottomans due to religious differences. That's why you need to know the Sunni Shia split. The Ottoman artillery and Janissaries crush the Safavids. The Ottomans are temporarily captured, and 200 years of conflict with the Ottomans. You need to know that split. This will show up on an SAQ or an LAQ or a DBQ. It's definitely going to show up on an MCQ. It is important to know. If you're ever going to go, what do I need to know for the test? It's this. It's this right now. It's this right here. This. All right. Shah Abbas. He was also known as Abbas the Great at the height of the empire. In 1622, he took control of the Strait of Hormuz, Hormuz, which is just south of Iran. It's right here where that arrow is pointing. He got the help of the English ships, which begins a long history of British interest in Iran. He builds the bureaucracy. He adds the janissaries, big on gunpowder, expands the empire. Here you go. You have Shah Abbas Mosque and the Royal Academy. Here it is in another angle. Their main export were carpets. But what goes up must go down. Leaders after Shah Abbas combined their lavish lifestyle and military spending, and they end up with a weak economy. He's replaced by the Zand dynasty in 1760. Women were veiled and restricted in their movements. They had their rights provided by Islamic law, but were barely mentioned in Safavid histories, showing a lack of political influence over time. We're going back to the map. If we've hit the Ottomans, we've hit the Safavids, we're going over to the Mughals. All right, the founder is a gentleman named Babur. He was military conquest. He used the Ottoman military tactics. He was less motivated by religion. He establishes a dynasty that lasts for over 300 years. He dies in 1530. His son Humayun takes over. He's intelligent but lazy. He's exiled to Safavid land, but he returns and he's successful. Then we have Akbar. He is a Mughal ruler. All people had the right to appeal to him for final judgment. Government officials, you need to know this term. You need to know what I'm about to tell you. And I think it shows up a little bit later for spelling reasons, but I'll even spell it for you too. Government officials that had collected taxes were called zamindars, Zamidars, Zamidars. They were paid with grants of land instead of salaries. Okay? Know this. After Akbar goes away, they kept more of the money they collected and built their own personal armies. This is going to lead to failure of the kingdom. So know that. Anyway, so he is really big. So even though he's Muslim, he pursues policies of cooperation with Hindu princes and the Hindu majority. This is a big deal. He encourages intermarriage. He promotes Hindus to the highest ranks. He ends a long-standing ban on the building of Hindu temples. He has a big deal, like he loves religious tolerance. So he is a very important person. That's why you need to know him. His son was Jahangir, I'm probably saying that wrong, and his grandson was Shah Jahan. By the way, you also need to know at its time the Mughal Empire was one of the richest and most best governed states in the world. The Taj Mahal was built because Shah Jahan's wife, it was built for her as a tomb. She passed away after childbirth. You don't need to know that for the test. It's just kind of one of those sad things to know. But this is syncretism. It blends Islamic geometry with Hindu ornamentation. Syncretism. Two things coming together, making a new thing. It's one of my favorite words. It's one of the AP favorite words. Mughal Empire. There it is, Zamindars. You need to know Zamindars. You need to know the caste system is going on. Akbar's reforms that helped women are eventually overturned and the sati comes back. Remember the sati? When the husband dies, the woman is expected to jump on the funeral pyre and take her life. Very, very sad. His son, this gentleman's son, Aurangzeb's, I'm butchering that. I apologize. He extends Mughal control throughout the subcontinent. He wants to purify Islam and rid the subcontinent of Islam. This is going to help lead to the decline. So the Mughal Empire is under attack from all areas. It was too weak to do anything about it. The decline leads to a growing military and economic intervention by the British. So all of these gunpowder empires are going to fall. It resulted from pressure from European trading companies. They're also weak or corrupt leadership. They also have expensive armies. And you have to look at the deep religious division. So in Mughal, it comes from Hindu and Islam. And the Ottomans and the Safavids are fighting because the Ottomans are Sunni and the Safavids are Shia. So if I were going to throw a SAQ at you and I'm going to talk about why, identify and explain a decline, a reason behind the decline of the gunpowder empires, you could say religious division. In Mughal India, it was Islam and Hinduism, or the Ottomans and the Safavids were fighting due to the Sunni Shia split. You need direct evidence, and you're looking at big picture ideas. All right, let's get to my favorite. We're going to do this Protestant Reformation. So Christianity splits. You got Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox Church, 1054, but then it really starts to go off in 1517. What causes this? Well, first we have the indulgences. Indulgences were things that could be purchased in order to reduce your punishment. So the Catholic Church had it so you had to make confession and say, okay, I confess for this sin, and then you would be told things you had to do. Well, instead of that, what you do is you say, well, I will buy the church a huge swath of land, and then your priest would say, okay, well, good. Now what you can do is you're going to go to heaven. You don't worry about sin. You're fine. Well, that's not fair. There was also buying and selling of church positions. You also have the Renaissance is going to cause the Reformation. There was a greed of secular leaders and the printing press because now everyone's starting to read that Bible. There are early cause of reform. You don't need to know all of these people, but it's just good to know that there were early reforms. The late 1300s, early 1400s, you have John Wycliffe from England, John Huss from Bohemia. They deny the Pope had the right to worldly power. They said the Bible had more authority than church leaders because there was a time where everyone got their message from the priest. Well, they're saying no, read the Bible. There's also this guy named Savonarola. He was executed in Florence. He was a Dominican friar. He denounced corruption in the church. And of course, the late 1500s, we have Christian humanists that we talked about, Erasmus and more. This is the guy you need to know about, though. Martin Luther. He said that you can get salvation, go to heaven by your faith alone. He said that indulgences showed corruption in the church. In 1517, he nails the 95 Theses to a church door in Germany. He, was helping that the printing press was spreading the ideas. The diet of worms is actually an imperial council. It's not a new diet you can get at the store. In 1521, it was held in Worms, Germany. This was to decide the fate of William Luther, or Martin Luther, sorry. The decision was known as the Edict of Worms. No one can help Martin escape punishment. He is an outlaw. But they said, if you come here and you recant, you're okay. He refuses. He was excommunicated from the church. He actually translates the first German Bible. So in 1525, the German Peasants' War starts, also known as the Peasant Revolt, a few other names. This is a widespread popular revolt from 1524 to 1525. It fails. 1 in 3 people basically die. 100,000 people die. Survivors were fined and achieved few, if any, of their goals. It was actually condemned by Luther. But this grew into the Civil War in the Holy Roman Empire that would last until 1555. The reason you need to know this is because what does it cause? What's the effect? Each German ruler could decide for his state, these are all these little states in Germany, what faith to follow. The North ends up being predominantly Protestant and the South predominantly Catholic. The South being closer to Rome, and that's in Italy. All right, Roman Catholic Church or Luther. There's a misspelling on this, and I forgot to fix it, but I will change it before it goes on the website. So, for Roman Catholic Church, faith and good works are needed for salvation. The Pope is infallible, which means he's without fault and has final authority. Clergy may not marry. That should say may not marry. The preachers cannot, or priests cannot get married. Nuns cannot get married. I will change that. They may not get married. Not get married. Faith alone leads to salvation. That was Martin Luther's idea. No hierarchy in the church. And he says vernacular languages for the Bible. That means that they should be published in the local language, not in Latin. All right, Calvinism. So, Calvinism, he agrees with Lutheran justification, but he basically says that if you're going to be saved, that's based on predestined. It's already destined by God. It doesn't matter what good works you do, you're gonna be saved whether or not you know it. You were just born that way. He's Geneva, Switzerland. He believes in a strong work ethic. Presbyterians in Scotland are into it, and Huguenots in France are into it. Then there's Anabaptists. It's like adult baptism. They avoid the sinful world. They live in small communities. It's just good to kind of know about them. Anglicanism, oh, my favorite. This was an act of supremacy declared by King of England, the leader of Church of England. So this is King Henry VIII. This was very Catholic in practice. Basically, when it started, it was Catholic, but they could get divorced because this was a political division because they were tired of listening to the Pope. You got to feel bad for King Henry VIII and the fact that he was forced to marry his brother's wife. His brother died, and in order to keep up friendly relations with Spain, he had to marry his brother's wife. And if you ever want to know a good party trick, these are his wives. This is the first one, the second one, the third one, the fourth one, the fifth one, the sixth one. Divorced, beheaded, died. Divorced, beheaded, survived. That's it. You don't need to know that for the test. It's just a fun little party trick. That's all. So during Elizabeth I's reign, we've got a Renaissance. It reaches its height in England. Of course, we know about Shakespeare, the Golden Age, and all that. The first attempt at colony was through joint stock companies. They defeat Philip II's Spanish Armada in 1588. It was sent to challenge English supremacy. There was the Protestant faith. Ha ha! And also, she was just never going to get married. Spain kind of wanted to marry her, and it was a whole big thing. And, it just didn't work out. She was the Virgin Queen. So there was a Catholic Reformation. During the Council of Trent, they actually correct some of the church's abuses. They also publish, though, an index of prohibited books that were considered dangerous to one's faith to read. So do they reform the church? A little. They abolish the indulgences, they educate some priests, but everything else is just pretty much reaffirmed. Now, the Society of Jesus, I want you to know some of this. I want you to know Francis Xavier. Why? He's the early 1500s. We're talking like 1500 to 1550s. He's a missionary. He takes a vow of poverty. He goes to Asia. He's the first missionary to go to Japan. He learns the local languages. It's important to know the local languages because then you learn the culture. Matteo Ricci, you need to know him. He was the late 1500s. I'm talking 1550 to like 1610s. He is an Italian. He goes to China. He's the first missionary to enter the forbidden city of Beijing in 1601 when he was invited because he knew astronomy and calendrical science, which is like science of the calendar. He actually converted several prominent Chinese officials to Catholicism. That's how big a deal he was. You should know them. They're probably going to show up in a reading. That's why you need to know these big people because when they show up in readings, you need to go, oh, they are big because they went to China, they went to Japan, they were, that's why you need to know them. So, what is the impact? Well, there's a century of religious war, there's widespread persecution, we've got witch hunts, and all of a sudden we have these many denominations of Christianity. For so long, we were just Catholic. And then we were Catholic and Eastern Orthodox. And then we were everything. 30 Years' War, the cause, the Holy Roman Empire wanted the subjects to return to Catholicism. The effect, well, you have the Peace of Westphalia. Here's the thing, the war was economically destructive. The bureaucracies and the middle class increase at the expense of lords and churches. The lords and the churches go down, the bureaucracies and the middle class go up. You need to know, I would be aware of the 30 Years' War. 3 million people, it's a lot. 3 million people die. It's a big deal for 30 years. Population goes down 36%. Inhabited villages go down 17%. Dwellings go down 28%. Food production goes down 34%. Domesticated animals go down 53%. Another result, absolutism. What is it, you ask? Well, it's a king or queen who hold all the power within their state's boundaries. Their goal was to control every aspect of society, economic, religious, and political. There's something called divine right, something that, Queen Elizabeth II to this day would still hold. The idea is that God creates the monarchy and the monarch acted as God's representative on earth. They answer only to God, not to his or her subjects. So today, Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister of England, answers to the people. The Parliament answers to the people. Queen Elizabeth II answers to God. She has a divine right. Does she do anything else other than wave to the people? Not really. She opens a few hospitals every so often, but Absolutism is happening in France. Henry IV founds the Bourbon monarchy. He lays the absolutist foundations. He issues the Edict of Nantes, which I might be saying wrong. Protestants worship in France without persecution. However, Louis the 14th revokes this to avoid the division in the realm. He effectively ends feudalism in France. He's known as the Sun King. And I did look this up, trying to get my French just perfect. I'm totally going to get it wrong. L'état, c'est moi, which means I am the state. That's what he's trying to say. So he made the nobles live at the palace to increase his power. He wanted to emphasize social rank. He actually ends up building Versailles, not himself. He gets it funded. I mean, it's beautiful, absolutely beautiful. I mean, look at it. It was just the state of opulence. Like, look at this. Look at how much power we have. Look how beautiful this place is. He appoints Jean-Baptiste Colbert, I might be saying that wrong too, as his finance minister. He was a mercantilist, and mercantilism is maximizing exports. That's basically what every country wants to do because if you maximize your exports, you're making more money. His positiveness, the positive thing about him was that they rank above all the other European countries in the arts and literature, and France was Europe's military leader, but he bankrupts the country caused by the wars, the building of the Palace of Versailles. So, absolutism in France and Russia. Got to get over to Russia. Russia was under the Golden Horde. The Golden Horde is a group of settled Mongols. That's what they were. They were ruling at the time. You need to know that. I mean, oh, there you go. Empire of the Great Khan, Khanate of the Golden Horde. There you go. So absolutism in Russia, you have Ivan the Terrible came to power in 1533. He spent his childhood fighting off the boyars, who are land-owning nobles. Know that. It's bold. Land-owning nobles, who are attempting to take his power. At 16 years old, he seized all power and became czar. That's not him at 16. After Ivan's death, his weak son came to power and died soon after. Russia went through a period of turmoil in which the boyars fought for power, but in 1613, Michael Romanov was chosen as the next czar and began the 300-year Romanov dynasty. The Romanovs, of course, were murdered in 1918. If you ever heard the story of Anastasia, she was a Romanov. Russia was much different from Western Europe. Serfdom lasted until about the mid 1800s. Russia had come into little contact with Western Europe and knew little of the cultural differences, and they were Orthodox Christians. But Peter the Great wants to change it. He wants to reduce the power of the boyars. He recruits men from low-ranking families and gives them government jobs. He wants to modernize the army, and he wants to pay for the changes. He increases the taxes. Guess what? He introduces potatoes to the diet. He starts a Russian newspaper. He raises women's status by having them attend social events. He gets the nobles to wear Western fashions because he wants to westernize everything. He opens a school of navigation and the arts and the sciences, and he builds St. Petersburg. Back to England, because why not? Let's get that constitutional monarchy up. Queen Elizabeth dies with no heir, so the Tudor dynasty becomes the Stuart dynasty. Her cousin is the King of Scotland, King James VI. Well, he's King James VI of Scotland, he becomes King James I of England. So he threatens the Puritans, and as such, in 1604, he authorizes a new translation of the Bible to settle the differences and solidify his own power. The King James Bible, of course, becomes like this huge thing. He is a divine right monarch. His son, Charles I, was an absolutist. His policies lead to the Great Migration, and the Great Migration are when all those Puritans came to America. This leads, of course, to this outbreak of an English Civil War. You have two sides. You have the Royalists, also known as the Cavaliers. They are pro-crown. They are loyal to Charles I. And then you have the Roundheads, who are supporters of the Parliament, who are led by Oliver Cromwell. Guess what? Charles I gets beheaded. Oh, the Cavaliers surrender in 1646. Parliament is in control. There's his head. Oh, it's not on his head anymore. Oh, or on his neck, rather. Sorry. Parliament abolishes the monarchy. They are declared a republic, but unfortunately, England actually becomes a military dictatorship under Cromwell because absolute power corrupts absolutely. Charles II was in exile because he's like, nah, y'all, I saw what y'all did to my dad. I'm out. But England offers him the throne back with limited powers because the devil you know is better than the devil you don't. And he accepts. So the restoration of Charles II to the throne was in 1660. England's government under Charles II is known as the Merry Monarch. The monarch's powers are now limited by their constitution. Charles II has no children, so when he dies in 1685, he gives the power over to his Catholic brother, James II. They ran out of names. So James declares his absolute power. He doesn't acknowledge the Parliament. So Parliament is like, yo, to his daughter, his Protestant daughter, by the way, because he's Catholic, they get his Protestant daughter Mary and her husband William, who's king of the Netherlands, to invade and take the throne. James II's like, I don't want to get beheaded, so he gets out of there. William and Mary are able to gain the throne in England without any bloodshed in what is known as the Glorious Revolution. They have a limited constitutional monarchy with a Bill of Rights. And if you've ever heard of the College of William and Mary in Virginia, it's named after William and Mary. What are the effects? Well, the short-term effects, the struggle between the crown and parliament led to a civil war and the execution of a king. The long-term effects, it led to a stronger parliament and more rights for English citizens because we have the English Bill of Rights. You will read about this. You will know about the English Bill of Rights. You really need to know about it. Let's jump on over to the East Asian world. We have about 5 slides left. Can you believe it? We're a little over an hour in. So after the Yuan dynasty, that's Yuan, Yuan also known as the Mongols, we have the Ming. So they kick out the Mongols, Ming means right? They're the first contact with the West. The missionaries arrived, like Ricci, we talked about him, but they promote isolationism. They end the Zheng He voyages. These were his voyages. Look, starts here, he's jumping over to Southeast Asia, goes over to South Asia, goes over to the Middle East, goes over to East Africa, and then they get rid of it. All right, we're going to jump over to Japan real fast. Japan's emperor was powerless and being controlled by a military leader. The shogun, Japan was united under the Tokugawa shogunate. After this government, the daimyo still ruled at the local level, but the shogun ruled over all of Japan. So think of the shogun like a president, and your daimyo, the actual definition of a daimyo is one of the great lords who are vassals of the shogun. So think of like a daimyo like a governor or a mayor. So what they do is they report back to the shogun. The Portuguese start trading with Japan, China, and Southeast Asia, and then they had those Jesuit missionaries that convert many Japanese to Christianity. So Toyotomi Hideyoshi prohibits any more Christian activity in this land, and the Jesuits were forced to leave the country within 20 days. Then they have these revolts that lead to the persecution of Japanese Christians. Not good. And the Japan soon prohibits foreign trade altogether, except from the Dutch in Nagasaki Harbor, only in that one area. And then for over 200 years, Japan remained isolated to limit foreign influence. They actually have a rise of kabuki theater, that's this theater right down here, which has an emphasis on violence. The government sought to oppress it, and women could not act in it. And that is the end. If you had any questions, I do hope that you wrote them down. You can, of course, come to me in the mornings, 6:30. For early morning tutoring or after school tutoring. You know, I'm always available. If you also want to, you could send me a list of your questions before you come and meet with me, so I'm ready to answer them all for you. I do like to look them up first just so I can verify my information. Make sure you go over this PowerPoint, pause it when necessary, and I really hope you didn't stay through the whole thing because it was a little over an hour and 10 minutes. So hope you enjoyed and have a great night. Bye.